Hi guys, I'm Javan Joel. I am the lead developer of CloudGunk, and today I'm going to talk about WebSockets, specifically in the context of using them in ASP.NET. So what are WebSockets? Well, they're a way to communicate to and from a web server, usually done in a technology like HTML5, which has the capabilities to do this now, and most browsers support this capability. It's really useful in things like chat, stuff like push notifications. So I'm going to get right into it and show you some code. Alright, so first to demonstrate, I want to show you guys what WebSockets are for. Here are two separate browser windows which are chats, and this allows me to communicate with other members through the CloudGunk website. So you can see as I type, on this side you have the little indicator showing that I'm typing something. Once I actually send the message, it immediately comes on this side, and I could do the same thing from here. So this immediate form of communication is what WebSockets accomplishes. So let me show you some code. You see in the JavaScript I have a variable which is going to hold my WebSocket connection. On document load, I connect to my socket server, which is just an API URL here, and I have a couple of event handlers here, the main one being onMessage, which takes my message object, it parses the event data, and then I execute some callbacks. The callbacks are basically, I'll show you what that looks like in a bit, but this also, if I want to send a message out to the chat server, I call my socket connection.send, stringifying this JSON object, which holds things like the chat ID, the message type, and the actual message that is being sent over. So how do we do that? If we go into the chat controller, this is a simple API controller for ASP.NET MVC web API. You see over here, this is my URL which JavaScript connects to actually establish a socket connection. And there's an extension method here which allows my current HTTP context to accept the WebSocket connection. And this accept socket request looks for a function. It wants a function that returns a task to accept any messages to and from the socket connection. So I call this method over here. This creates an object, it adds a connection to the chat server, and returns back this function, which is a task to process any incoming messages. So in the process incoming messages, this is my ASP socket connection. This is taken from the chat controller in this method accept WebSocket request. This is automatically going to pass in this object right here, and this is established on the connection. So I get a reference to the socket itself. Then I have this while loop, and this while loop basically says I'm going to await any messages to receive. So if the socket state is open, I'm going to take the message, it's a byte array, and I'm going to convert that to a string. Then if it's the end of message, because you get the messages in chunks, so you want to make sure you get the full message before you deserialize it, and I deserialize it to an object, which is the chat server message. And this matches what I pass back in JavaScript, which is the chat ID, the message type. That's simply the enumeration on whether it's a message, whether I'm writing, an account came online or offline. And then the actual message itself, which could be an object, it could be a string, it could be an ID, depending on what I'm sending back. So once I got that object, then I could broadcast that message to other socket connections. That's just basically looking at the chat, seeing what the participants are, and sending the message over to other socket connections, which once I get the active sockets, I call this send message async, which takes my socket that I referenced and calls the send async method. This is expecting a byte array, or an array segment, which is basically a byte array of the serialized message. So once that's received in my JavaScript, this is what that onMessage function was all about. And that's it. So again, you establish a socket connection in JavaScript. You have an onMessage to accept any incoming messages which you process, and you also have a send function which sends messages out to this chat server. On the chat server side of things, we have a reference to our WebSocket where we process incoming messages, and we also have the ability to send messages through that socket. And that's it. So that's it, guys. That's how easy it is to get set up with socket connections. And despite the fact that this was an ASP.NET, you could do this in any technology. Maybe if you're using like a LAMP stack, as long as your server supports WebSockets, most browsers support them. And you could do the same thing as I just did in your technology. So let me know if there's anything I haven't covered, maybe you still have a question on. I'd be happy to help you out.